Vampyr, not vampire. Vampyr is a vampire game from 2018. A vampire game that I had very high hopes for. Probably too high hopes. The trailers looked good. I love the atmosphere. It set a dark, moody tone. London 1918, in the middle of a city-wide pandemic. Is that too topical right now? Don't worry, this one has vampires. Unfortunately, Vampyr is not a very good game. I hope that sets the mood well enough. Mind you, I certainly tried very hard to like it because I was truly looking forward to this game initially, and even after I had realized there were too many problems for me to give it a thumbs up, I kept playing because I had hit my sunk cost fallacy point of no return. I had to finish the game. I put around 48 hours into Vampyr at this point, which is 1 hour more than I put into Sekiro, and I like Sekiro. At the same time, I was hoping that perhaps the ending, or at least latter half of the game, would redeem the entire playthrough, and it never did. It just made things worse. It was extra frustrating because the game did everything almost right. They were almost there, but didn't manage to go all the way. Certain things they do well. The music in the game is fantastic. It's so atmospheric, it really sets the tone well. And when you walk around 1918 London, the setting itself is also marvelous. If only they'd put more detail into what they had, I firmly believe I would have loved this game. As it stands, I do not. I'm going to tell you why this game is not very good, but I'm going to be all in-depth about it, so first, for those of you who aren't into spoilers, here's the why in short. It's not very engaging, the conversations are dull, and somehow it all still manages to be confusing without having that crazy I'm a vampire feeling. It looks nice though, and definitely had a lot of untapped potential. I won't start the review off with spoilers, so you can keep watching a little longer if you like, I sure would, but I'll give you more than ample warning when we get to spoiler territory. So, let's begin.
I've lost touch with the real.
I'm aware that a lot of people really like this game. I actually played the game at release, and I raised a lot of eyebrows for not liking the game. And I'm sure I'll get a lot of angry comments on this very late review as well. Yes, I know this game came out ages ago, but I'm not exactly known for jumping onto any new thing in a timely fashion. If you love this game, you will hate me after this review, and that's okay. But maybe after I tell you why I don't like this game, you'll at least see my point of view and only tell me to walk off a very small cliff, where I only break a few bones and not straight into the Grand Canyon to my immediate death. So, step by step, we'll start with the combat. Ever since I played this game all the way at release, 2 new difficulty modes have been added. One that's easier than the original difficulty, and one that's harder. So for the sake of this review, I dragged myself back into the game to replay it on the hard mode, to see how much of a difference it would make. My original playthrough was done on what's currently known as normal mode. I went with the pacifist route, as I usually do in games where that's an option. Playing the game in this way is meant to make combat harder from the get-go, so I suppose in a way, I picked hard mode anyway. That's because in this game your combat skills are determined by how much blood you suck, and the only way to suck blood, aside from the occasional quest completion and the like, is to kill people. Literally suck them dry, so I decided against that and went without leveling up for the majority of my playthrough. By the time I reached the final boss, I was level 25. Compared to my hard mode playthrough, where I decided to go full crazy vampire mode and kill anyone and everyone humanly or inhumanly possible, where I was level 50, which is the max level, but apparently you can still get points even after that. I literally doubled my level, and here's the kicker. I played that hard mode in the single most shallow way possible. Let me explain blood first for that to make sense. In Vampyr, any person that isn't a vampire themselves has a few important stats. First, their mesmerize level. This can be as low as 1 or as high as 5. Dr. Reed, that's the player character, also has a mesmerize skill, and depending on how good at hypnotizing he is, he'll be able to lure his victims away to a secluded area to suck on their blood, blah blah blah. The weaker willed the person, the easier it is, you get the idea. Next, there's their blood quality. As you might have guessed, the better the blood, the better the experience sucked out of them. Some people are sick, and that makes their blood worse. And some people you aren't personally acquainted with, and that means their blood is also worse. Yes, that's right, if you don't know a person well enough on a deep, personal level, then their blood will become bad. Why is that? No one knows. Vampire magic, probably. That means that if you want the most out of a single victim, you'll have to make sure they stay healthy, and you'll have to get to know them. We'll get to how that works later, but at least now you know the basics of blood. So when I say I played hard mode in the single most shallow way possible, what I mean is that I didn't cure any of the sick, and I didn't unlock any of their personal hints. I didn't know a thing about anybody, and they were all dying of the plague. My level 50 vampire was still technically underleveled for the amount of people he killed, and it didn't matter at all. The thing about the combat in Vampyr is that initially it will look flashy. In your level up tab, you have a few options. You can upgrade your health, of course, but also the amount of blood you suck in combat and how much damage that blood sucking does. Yes, they're separate stats. You can also upgrade how many items you can carry, and most importantly, you can pick new skills entirely, like blood shields or blood claws. And the blood claws look very cool until you realize that it's all you really need, because the combat is ridiculously easy. I want to make sure I don't understate this. The combat is ridiculously easy until it's annoying. Not hard, don't mistake it for hard, just annoying. The most trouble I've had in the game was a boss I tried to take on while I was 13 levels below them, which meant she was able to one-shot me. When you take a good long look at the talents available to you, you'll soon realize that, first of all, you will never really have enough blood available to constantly spam more abilities than just the one of your choice, alongside your heal and your ultimate ability. Each ability has a bunch of upgrades available, and before you finish maxing those out, unless you're going for a full aggression playthrough, you won't even really have points left to invest in much else. Here's those skills. Autophagy. I probably mispronounced that horribly, but that's basically your only way to heal. You will max out this skill, and yes, it costs blood to cast. Then there's body condition and physical prowess, which increases your health and stamina respectively. You want to max those out too. That's a no-brainer. Blood capacity increases the amount of blood you can hold, and big thirst increases the amount of blood you absorb in combat using your bite ability. Definitely get those maxed. Hard biting increases the amount of damage done through bite, which you're going to be biting quite a bit, so you might as well. And fast regeneration increases your life regeneration when you bite. Those are all passive skills, and all of them are an upgrade, no matter your playstyle. That's a lot of points gone already. Let's make it simple. You will want to get the offensive ability Claws and the ultimate Abyss. And now I'll tell you why. You have two aggressive resources, stamina and blood. On practically any single enemy, any single one, you can apply an easy stun tactic. You have an actual physical weapon in your hand that you can attack with, but it drains stamina. You have claws, but it drains blood. You can find weapons, very easily I might add, that absorb blood as you attack. Can you see where I'm going with this? You start by mashing your regular attack until you're out of stamina, then you use claws. While the enemy is stunned and while you use the ability, your stamina regenerates. Yes, really. That means right after using claws, you can generally continue attacking with your regular weapon again, and most enemies aren't that sturdy unless you go wildly out of your level range. And guess what? If this ridiculous stun lock combo doesn't work for you, each enemy, aside from some bosses, in fact I think it's just the final boss, is stunnable. Not just momentarily knocked back by claws, properly stunnable. You can stun them and drink their blood too. And guess what? Again, if all else fails, you can just use your ultimate. Abyss. Glory be, because Abyss is so dumb, it even works on the very final boss. And this ability is a straight up 3 or so seconds long stun, during which you can go to town with your blood absorb weapon, or stun them really. It's really that stupid. Does that list of things to do sound complicated? Trust me, if you've played the game before, you know it's not. And I've played the game before, and I know it's not. I went in completely blind and I figured them all out easily, and quite frankly, I'm not that imaginative, so I'm sure there are other people who figured out even easier ways to deal with combat. Now, a criticism I often hear about this sort of gameplay is, well, if you only use the cheesy abilities, of course you won't have fun. But I have not one but two responses to that. Firstly, if you give players this option so readily, so easily, do you really think anyone's going to go the other route, intentionally nerfing oneself? Most people wouldn't. You have to actively think to yourself, you know what? I won't use those abilities, they're just too powerful, and it would make the game too easy. And that's also not fun, that's very silly. Secondly, I've tried the other abilities. One of them, coagulation, is also pretty stupid, I might add, but most of the others are straight up boring or very, very bad. Abyss is by far the superior ultimate, as Rage is practically useless on bosses, and Blood Cauldron, while also fine, is just as boring as Abyss. Your character stands there and does some damage, then moves on with life. It does not change your gameplay in the slightest, you're just going to take slightly longer killing the thing. The majority of the other abilities that I didn't mention are defensive, like invisibility, to get out of combat, or a ranged attack that isn't worth bothering with. The other abilities aren't just worse, they're also equally boring to my original playstyle, and if you want to combine several of the abilities to perhaps create something interesting, you can't most of the time because they all cost blood. So instead of weaving interesting attacks through your regular melee jabs, you just sit there wondering where the hell all your blood went. The worst thing is, you can't really skip fights in an area you're questing through. You can't open doors while you're being attacked. So if there's a group of random guards surrounding the one door you need, you have to fight through the whole lot of them, just so you can open the door behind them that they didn't have anything to do with in the first place. And don't get me wrong, at the beginning I thought the combat was pretty fun. The problem is the repetition. If you want to make fights feel like they matter, you have to make sure they're different each time, and none of them feel like they're just there for the hell of it. And practically every single fight in Vampyr feels that way. There are a few boss battles, of course, and some of them are interesting, but even then, those boss battles get rehashed time and time again when they show up as regular foes after the fact. Not to mention that sometimes the foes are magnetic, apparently. Why are you lying to me? The combat isn't fun, it's a chore, but surely the rest of the game isn't. Well, it certainly isn't banking on the dialogue, I can tell you that much. Vampyr was created by Don't Nod Entertainment, the same Don't Nod that created the original Life is Strange, a game I thoroughly enjoyed despite the ending and the sometimes very awkward pop culture references. It's still one of my favorites to this day for multiple reasons. However, at this point, I almost feel like it was a fluke, because Vampyr's writing was awful and I didn't really enjoy Life is Strange 2 either. Don't worry, I won't bother you with that one. Vampyr's writing is so impressively dull that I started skipping dialogue altogether. If you've ever been to one of my streams, you'll know that that isn't something I do lightly. But when I say each NPC had the same questionnaire, I really am not kidding.
Okay, so, age and name?
15. Nick?
Occupation?
Boot black.
Blood type, diseases, and where do you see yourself in 10 years?
What's this about, sir? And why'd you give me this random medicine that I probably don't have the disease for?
Goodbye!
As Jonathan Reed, you are apparently afflicted with a hyperfixation on people's occupations and their life in London, after which you will inevitably ask everyone a series of personal questions. Every single conversation with an NPC that isn't directly involved in the main story is just a glorified exposition dump and nothing more. Yes, I am Mr. Person, my job is sweeper, my life in London is garbage, and I have an affair with a lady from the fishery, thanks for finding out. My blood now tastes yummy. And yes, because there is only a single London, every single person says the exact same thing when you ask them about the situation in London, making the entire dialogue option even more pointless. Outside of the fact that we already know the situation is terrible without even having to ask anyone. Even when a character had a moderately interesting backstory or a secret worth finding out, they weren't really worth knowing about because those characters would have no significance to you as a player after finishing that very short quest line. And that wouldn't be too big of a problem if it wasn't for the fact that the characters themselves left about as much of an impression as a helium balloon. As it stands, their only use is to be blood bags. Juicy, experience-filled blood bags. The quests they send you on aren't generally very interesting either. I'm not even sure you can call them quests as such. Sometimes you'll find items around town that have some kind of significance to a certain person. Finding the item will either unlock a new dialogue option, or you'll simply be able to bring it to them so they can tell you about it, so you get to know them a little better. And outside of the fact that these conversations are generally just very bland, I don't mean to rag on the voice actors here, I'm sure they were doing their very best to pull something out of this script, something that just wasn't there. The choices you as a character are allowed to make are also odd in terms of how your character actually voices said choices.
So you see, sir, I'm just more of a chocolate kind of girl than vanilla.
How to respond to this? Such choices. I suppose chocolate's fine. It's not my favorite, but I can certainly compromise on your statements. Incestuous harlot!
Jonathan Reed has a habit of becoming strangely forceful for no reason whenever he's trying to get anywhere with any given person. You'll be having a rather calm conversation one minute, but the next you choose a dialogue option that apparently landed in the aggressive spectrum, and Dr. Reed flies straight off the handle because he didn't agree with the prostitute's slogan, "The plague sucks, but I suck better." It's incredibly jarring when your voice changes so strangely in the middle of a conversation, only to go back to your previous tone once that particular dialogue option has concluded. And this is just as strange when it comes to NPCs and the way they react to you throughout your playthrough. Things get wildly inconsistent. During my first day in the hospital you're assigned to at the beginning of the game, I awkwardly shuffled past everyone in the hospital in plain sight, victims in front of my outstretched, obviously mesmerizing hands before I murdered said victims, leaving their bodies for anyone to find on the hospital floor. Nobody bats an eyelid. Still. Not even the doctor who brought me in, knowing full well that the moment he brought a new vampire into the fold, suddenly people started dying. Boy, I wonder what the correlation is, nobody tell him. As I shuffle off with yet another victim, someone in the background loudly proclaims, "The hospital is so lucky to have Dr. Reed, you know. Nobody calls me out, nobody treats me differently, the people that didn't trust me before still don't trust you, and the people that didn't care still don't care." That statement becomes even stranger when you realize that this game has a system in place that's intended to punish the player for killing innocent humans. I say innocent humans because throughout the game you are in fact killing regular humans that are part of the quote-unquote enemy faction left, right, and center. Apparently, even though these people do think they're serving the greater good and all they're trying to do is protect the population from vampire attacks, we're happy to slaughter them at will. And there really aren't any options to deal with them in a non-lethal way, like knocking them out or putting them to sleep through vampire powers. If you go wild and kill most or even all of the NPCs in a certain district, then that particular zone will be overrun. And there are a few problems with this. There are 4 districts present in the game. The Pembroke Hospital, where you start. This district is practically impossible to turn hostile because it's your main home base and you basically need at least one of the NPCs there to finish the game. The docks, Whitechapel and West End, however, are all ripe for the ruining. When checking out any given district, there's a health bar on the left of the screen that tells you how well the district's doing. In other words, how many NPCs are still alive. If NPCs are sick, they'll start dying off on their own. But you can also simply go out and kill them, of course. And that isn't all. Each district also has a pillar of the community, and if that one dies, the district's health will plummet. They're all part of the main questline as well, so it's honestly pretty easy to accidentally kill them during said questline. And this game does not allow you to manually save. You'll have to download mods for that. So if you mess up a reaction, you simply lose the pillar. Remember how we talked earlier about how Reed's responses often differ wildly from what you thought the dialogue choice was going to be? Yeah, it's very easy to mess this up. Although granted, the pillar choices in this game are probably the best, most interesting part by far. Now, you might think to yourself, well, if everyone dies in a district, or even worse, all districts, something terrible will happen, right? You would think that, but honestly, not really. You can't use some vendors, of course, and certain quests are undoable because the place is now filled with enemies instead. That's probably the greatest deterrent for me, even more combat. But otherwise, the only true difference is the ending of the game, and while that's certainly a big enough deal to some, the game seems to imply that killing people would actively make the game harder for you when it doesn't really. Hell, you can even completely circumvent most of the trouble it gives you, which is really just the extra enemies, by waiting until you've progressed far enough through the main quest to reach Mesmerize level 5, at which point you'll be able to kill every single possible NPC in town. In fact, if you want to personally kill everyone, you kind of have to do that, because if you only kill a few people, then go to sleep for the night, there's a good chance the rest of the district will fall into ruin overnight, meaning the NPCs all disappear along with their juicy blood. Because time only moves if Reed sleeps. But no, otherwise, when it comes to the story outside of purely the ending, nothing really changes after a district falls. No one makes mention of it, no one's concerned about the districts around them falling rapidly, no one even wonders about your outdoor questing in said districts as a doctor. Sure, the place is overrun and you don't have access to some people, but in games like these, where they so clearly focus on the characters and the story, I would have expected there to be more narrative changes and less, now kill more things. You could say that most of the characters could assume it was simply the disease doing its work, but as this is a video game, a story-driven one no less, a small change in tone depending on how the districts are doing wouldn't have gone amiss. Quite like the man yelling about the wonderful Dr. Reed when we first arrived in the hospital, just a line while you walk through the hospital halls would have sufficed. I really feel the walls closing in on us with so many people disappearing lately, if things are going badly. Or, I think we have a fighting chance, we're going to make it, if you manage to keep most, if not all, of the districts healthy. When it comes down to it, that isn't even the weirdest thing for people to not comment on. As you play through the game whilst drinking at least a little bit of blood, you can see very obvious, visible changes in Jonathan's face. I am so obviously a vampire for most of my playthrough, it's actually upsetting, but no one seems to ever make mention of it.
Hello, fine sir, I am definitely not a vampire.
That is until you meet a member of the Priwen Guard, who immediately recognizes you as being a vampire by glancing at you sideways once. You might say, well, he's a vampire hunter, of course he would know. You can't tell me that regular, non-vampire hunter people don't notice when the whites of your eyes have turned completely and utterly black, as they had in my hard mode playthrough. Someone at least gulp when they start a conversation with me? I'm really not asking for that much. As it is, the world feels very static, like the characters themselves. I can excuse most graphical sacrifices, usually anyway, but in the case of Vampyr, the facial animations, or lack thereof, are actually incredibly jarring.
You ought to report to Dr. Swansea in his office. He's been looking for you. Seemed pressing.
Yeah, and she just looks straight up into the camera. Look at her face! Look at her face! She's like, you should find them. Seemed pressing. Like, she doesn't care. She does not care! Yeah, I'm sorry, but everyone's facial expressions are just this. I am excited. Oh boy. Oh, now I am afraid. I am now overcome with joy. You seem nervous.
Are you certain? You seem nervous.
So nervous you lost your eyebrows.
Just speak.
Sorry, my face is tired from dealing with everything.
Everyone keeps telling you about their various emotions, but none of them ever show it. I am angry. They seethe at you in a bland tone of voice as their eyes maintain the exact same shape they always have. The only part of their faces that seem to move at all are their mouths, and sometimes they make very funny faces because of that. They're also definitely overcompensating for the lack of facial movements by making the NPCs sway their bodies all over the place when you're trying to have a conversation with them.
Good evening.
Hello.
Did I come at a bad time?
What are you on about?
I'll come back later.
There are a number of other, admittedly nitpicky things that started bothering me throughout the game as well, though some of them I'll have to make note of during the spoiler part of this review. The main thing that started to really push itself to the forefront, though, was the lack of consistency in the world itself. A person would tell you one thing and do another, items would be in wildly strange places, and Jonathan wouldn't bat an eye. If you've ever played The Witcher 3, and perhaps even watched a documentary or two on the game, then you might have heard some of the developers talk about how much time they spent in trying to make sure that the world made sense. When you ran into a small hut in the fields where two poor farmers lived, that hut wouldn't be stocked with food, no matter how much more interesting they thought it would have looked. Those two poor farmers who already had a terrible harvest that year would not have had access to several sausage strings swaying on the ceiling. There wouldn't be any bread or ham sandwiches in their pantry. In Vampyr, however, they seem to have gone the complete opposite way.
So you steal from the dead, then?
That's correct.
So watches, brooches, necklaces, wallets, that sort of thing?
Exactly like those very solid items that are definitely not chemicals.
Alright, let me see your stock.
We got some white phosphorus, codeine, opium, sodium hydroxide.
You might think that's an exaggeration, but unfortunately it really isn't. You see the pawnbroker steal wallets and watches, and when you walk over to check out his inventory, you expect to see said items for sale so you can take them apart for materials. But no, the man sells nothing but a list of chemicals. On the same list of things that don't make sense, we find Dr. Reed prescribing medicine to anyone who asks willy-nilly. In fact, they don't even have to ask. Yes, we are a doctor and we can probably set a probable diagnosis, but that doesn't mean we're literally God. It's partially explained by I'm a vampire and can see if people are sick, but it's honestly a pretty damn far stretch, because you still have Reed ask the patient about his symptoms.
3 drugs from an English doctor.
Bronchitis.
It must be my lucky day.
That was an expensive medicine. How could he say he doesn't need anything?
Goodbye, Mr. Petrescu.
Clearly needed it. Also, just
the fact that my medical analysis goes, hey, how do you feel? I feel tired. Here, bronchitis.
Apparently, I am very tired translates to you probably have bronchitis. Of course, the game requires you to be able to set a diagnosis fast, because otherwise how are you going to keep your district healthy? But the way they go about it is honestly a little ridiculous. When it comes down to it, I feel like the game could have benefited tremendously from having less characters around, but going more in depth with the ones that are there. As it stands, every single NPC has their own little quest line that isn't very intriguing. They all have their own very samey dialogue and they all have wooden faces. More time spent on the details of each character would have done the game a world of good. They also don't have an ounce of subtlety to them. I was never torn between decisions when it came to killing or not killing a person. The only reason I didn't really kill anyone, save a single person on my first playthrough, was just because, well, I decided not to. But it was pretty obvious who the bad people were in this game. They literally tell you to your face.
Whitechapel. If you're quick and cautious, you'll be able to avoid the savages.
No. When I need a checkup, I'd go to a bloody doctor, not some back alley clinic full of sick foreigners.
Why don't you just give me the option to punch him at least? Just give me the option. I'll deal with the consequences, but give me the option to punch him.
And your only recourse is to either straight up kill them or to let them do their thing. After you do eventually kill them, they get a little last thoughts monologue where they try to make you feel bad for killing them, except that it never works because the game has turned every single one of them into a mustache-twirling villain. None of them seem to have any regard for their own life in this case either. There's an even better example of this in spoiler territory, but at the very beginning of the game, there's a man you meet near the hospital who had just been in a fight and was on the verge of dying. You can help him, of course, but he insults you almost immediately when you approach him. And I don't mean insult you in a stay away from me kind of way. No, he basically says, hey dickface, help me right now or else. Or else what? You're dying. No sane person would go about asking for help that way. The guy's a criminal, so that's one way to explain it, but criminals generally also don't want to die. A final note on the quests in general before we hop into the spoilers. As said, you can pick up smaller quests in this game outside of the main story. Those quests mainly revolve around picking up an item here and there and then bringing it to the designated person who will then tell you their life story. Riveting as that no doubt sounds, quite a few of them can be picked up before you can even finish them at all, because you can't go into the area that holds the item. This is something you're going to run into often, even in general. Certain doors are arbitrarily locked off because the story requires you to take a different entrance so an event can trigger. That's all fine and dandy, but it makes side questing infuriating. One door will have opened earlier, but now it's closed because the main quest said so. It'll open a quest or so later, but you won't know that until you try. It also doesn't help that when you open your map to set a custom marker so you know where you're going, you can't do so anywhere near the selected quest because the cursor magnetizes to the center of the area where that quest is, like so.
Okay, if you don't know what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to put a marker over... Oh my god, let go! I'm trying to put a marker just above it so I can go to the alleyway, but... yeah. The power of Christ does not just compel me. The power of Christ is making my cursor magnetize to the side. If I just do very... I'll just... How about just the entrance? How about... Oh my god!
Small things like these are the reason I couldn't ever truly immerse myself into the game. They stacked up. And every time I thought I was on a roll, something would happen that ticked me off momentarily, immediately knocking me out of the moment. Oh, and on the list of most minor of inconvenience is the translation as well. Don't Nod is a French company, so their game had to be translated to English, and that didn't always go as well as you'd hope. Spelling and grammar errors are all over the place, which is a bit of a showstopper when you're streaming and trying to read a letter out loud, only to run into the weirdest set of words you've ever seen shoved into a single sentence. I wouldn't normally have much of a problem with that if it wasn't for the fact that, generally, games get playtested before release, and I find it difficult to believe that no one caught on to this, because there are so many of them.
I've lost touch with the real.
Right, that's all I have for the non-spoiler territory. If you haven't played the game yet and want to go in entirely unspoiled, then this is the moment where you will want to bow out. I'll give you a moment. You might be holding a very hot cup of tea. Have you set it down? Alright, close the window. Good. Let's get on with the main story. You play as Jonathan Emmett Reed, a doctor fresh from the war, here to visit his sickly mother. Alas, your fate was instead to be bitten by a vampire upon making it to the city proper. He's left for dead in a mass grave where he wakes up, thirsting for blood. Unfortunately for him, the only nearby sack of blood is his dear sister Mary, who had come out to this specific place looking for you. You immediately jump her and suck every bit of her blood in seconds, after which she also immediately dies, falling to the floor while wearing the expression of most of the still alive NPCs. Jonathan at this point gives her the lightest of all pecks on the lips. I need you to remember this point, we'll get back to that. Straight away, the Priwen Guard, vampire hunters, find him and Jonathan has to run for his life until he finds a knife, at which point you start murdering them without any issue. Mind you, we don't drink their blood because that would be useful and we're trying to hold on to our most wasteful vampire in London title. We just slash them to pieces. In the meantime, we figure out that the sun burns us, the guard is made up of very dumb, very deaf people, and that touching things apparently gives us a short history of the object itself, except it doesn't always do that, only when the story says it should. On the topic of visions, Reed keeps hearing a voice in his head who tells him an odd little story about a red queen, but he doesn't know what it means, except that this voice is the one who bit him and turned him into a vampire. Reed tries to shoot himself and technically succeeds, but when he wakes up in the morning, realizes he's not dead, even after a direct shot through the heart, and so Jonathan's quest to find out who bit him begins. The guard found him again, and the running away restarts until he makes it to a different district and the relative safety of a local bar, where our good doctor starts asking random questions about everyone's lives and the goings-on in the city, including the random murders taking place everywhere. He meets a man called Dr. Edgar Swansea of the Brotherhood of St. Paul, the Brotherhood being a group that likes to research vampires, in a room upstairs, who can answer some questions about his current situation, but not all, as Edgar is also here to investigate the situation to begin with. So Reed is back to square one, until he eventually finds out that a man called William Bishop had visited the bar as well, and he wasn't looking so good. Strangely enough, everyone could tell that something was up with Mr. William Bishop, but when Reed turns into a full-on vampire, no one bats an eye. Regardless, Reed follows the trail of murder until we find William, who is seemingly feeding on a man called Sean. Here's the weird thing. William had apparently been feeding on Sean for a while now, just taking a little bit of blood every so often without actually killing him. Yet, at least. But we, as Dr. Reed, can never do that because of reasons unknown. This is but the first of many broken rules in the game. Another wildly strange detail that's probably interesting to note is the absolute state of this area. The place is littered with corpses. A lot of them are stuck on stakes in a very Vlad the Impaler type fashion, others are just heads on sticks. There's a wild amount of them. Never, even once in this game, is this explained. The vampires we meet don't generally stake things at random for aesthetical purposes. The smaller, crazy vampires we meet are seen straight up eating entire bodies on the ground, but apparently this newly turned tiny man is really into imitating a Transylvanian count for no reason other than, I bet it looks gruesome, you guys. There is literally no point whatsoever, especially because it doesn't seem like he's keeping a snack for later, as he's begging Sean for more blood when we find him. And Sean, right after saving him, even says that William wasn't evil, he just needed a drink, as he sits there, surrounded by mutilated corpses. Anyway, we save Sean, after which we in turn are saved by Dr. Swansea on a boat, who invites us to work at his hospital, where, just before we actually enter the hospital, Reed learns how to mesmerize people so he can more easily drain their blood. At this point, we're also more or less informed that no famished hunter can run for long, implying that if we don't drink blood, we'll eventually die. We even find a note later saying basically the same thing. They need blood to function. I'm going to go ahead and tell you this right now. That is a lie. You can go the entire game without drinking even a tiny sip of blood. There are 0 consequences for not drinking any blood, save that you won't get as much experience, but as we've gone over the combat system before, that really isn't a problem at all. Reed gets to know the people around the hospital and the various other places we can already go, as well as you can get to know a cardboard cutout, after which you analyze the blood you picked up from William Bishop, learn that it was a pointless endeavor, and then we go to sleep. In the morning, he brings up his completely non-existent thirst for blood again as Nurse Dorothy comes in to tell you we're all out of antiseptics. Reed goes out to an old morgue to alchemy up his own antiseptic, which is the first of his many miracles. Upstairs, we find Dr. Swansea holding a skull in the most Shakespearean fashion possible, who tells us about a certain Lady ASHBURY, the hospital's main benefactor, who needs the help of a vampire. But Lady ASHBURY is also a vampire, except that someone else knows this and is blackmailing her. We're tasked with finding out who the blackmailer is, so of course we go off to ask the local gossip, Harriet Jones, who behaves like a haughty princess and gives us absolutely no useful information whatsoever, except the quest says that she did, because now we know of a mysterious man visiting the hospital at night? Even though really Harriet only complained about the nurses being whores and carrying STDs. She tells you that she's sure one of the nurses is sleeping with someone, but if you've done an earlier side quest, which I did do during my playthrough, you already knew that Pippa Hawkins was sleeping with Milton, a vendor hanging out outside. Reed doesn't ever actually bring this up and goes straight to asking the nurses about the strange man visiting one of the nurses during her shift. But the only reason this questline existed was so you could go out to look for Nurse Dorothy Crane, who is in fact doing some shady things on a boat just outside of the hospital, in clear view of everyone, might I add. Game, if you were going to put a side quest concerning a nurse sleeping with a man in secret before a main story quest where we have to ask about a shady man meeting a woman in secret at night, maybe you should have instead not done that. The only reason this main story quest works is because of apparent luck, and if you're wondering, no, that's not very good writing. We didn't figure out the mystery of the man visiting at night in secret because she wasn't being very secretive, and the man technically didn't even visit the hospital. How would Harriet Jones have ever seen this man visiting the hospital if their meeting happens on the water just outside of the hospital she's in? Anyway, we find Dorothy doing deals with a shady character and learn that she too possesses the power of teleportation.
Oh, yeah, I'm pretty sure she's a vampire because she literally disappeared. Literally. Like, at least make an animation that she's just boating away. And she's just like, oh, well, I better magic my way out of here.
We follow the man who disappeared into the sewers, but he was unfortunately killed by the sewer beast, a wolf vampire who lives in the sewers. But at least we find out that Nurse Crane runs a free medical checkup service for the poor in Whitechapel. So we go to check it out and find Darius Petrisco acting as a door guard for Crane's little medical clinic, so we have to find a way to convince him to let us in. Which we do by eavesdropping on Darius and Nurse Crane. They bring up a poet and a journalist who wander around the place a lot, and each of these give you information you can use to talk Darius into letting you in. When you go back to him, you'll also notice that you have the option to mesmerize him, except that you don't because he requires mesmerize level 2, and at this point in the main story, you cannot have mesmerize level 2, because it requires you to get past this particular quest. Actually, maybe they didn't playtest their game after all. You might think that's a petty thing to complain about, but this particular problem really puts the game's lack of polish on display. This mistake on its own isn't not a problem, but it's this problem on top of many other smaller problems that make the game seem like an unfinished mess half the time. Don't Nod at this point is no longer a tiny indie studio. They made Life is Strange and it was very successful, and more importantly, it didn't have all these tiny mistakes bothering me like pinpricks throughout my playthrough. And now, with more budget, somehow they rushed more than they did on their first game, leaving in silly, very obvious mistakes like this one. Anyway, we convince Darius to let us in by using logic that we would have probably used without knowing anything about the guy as well, and proceed upstairs, where Dorothy Crane is struggling to keep a patient alive. She asks for help, and you can either be me, who doesn't know any medical terms and is not a native English speaker, or you can be a doctor who knows the English terms. I let the guy die because I don't know what quinine salts, a tracheostomy, thoracostomy, epinephrine, or an intercostal artery is, nor do I know what it means to suture the artery. And then she gets mad at you for trying, but it's okay because we get to take some of his blood for analysis. We still have to confront her, however, because she is in fact the blackmailer, even though there isn't really any direct evidence of this except that she's helping the poor in a less than savory manner. So really what Nurse Crane should have said was, "What blackmail? I have no idea what you're talking about. How on earth did you come to that conclusion?" And she could have talked her way out of it pretty easily. But she doesn't do that. Instead, she heaps some more prejudice onto my character, just like everyone else in this game, assuming that we're stuck up and prissy and spoiled, even though we're clearly not, and she should know this because we told her we fought in the war, and even made a makeshift medicine out of whatever we could find in the nearby morgue when the hospital ran out, but hey, we're stuck up nobility now, and that's that, I guess, because Crane forgot that we've interacted before in any way, shape, or form. You now get to choose how you will deal with Nurse Crane's blackmail. You can spare her, which will see her continue her work, but move her blackmail crosshairs onto someone else. You can embrace her, which simply kills her and leaves the entirety of the Whitechapel district without medical aid. Or you can charm her, which was my choice in my first playthrough. The charm option seems like the best idea, but it's actually the worst. It's also a choice that you are required to unlock before you're even allowed to choose it, and it means Jonathan will use his vampire powers to make Dorothy forget everything about Lady Ashbury and the hospital she works in. How did Jonathan suddenly learn to do this? We don't explain these things, just accept it. However, doing this will result in Crane becoming a husk of her former self, eventually turning into one of the crazy, mindless zombie-type vampires called Skulls. These choices, the pillar choices, if you will, are the most interesting part of Vampyr, and I wish with all my heart that there was more of this in the game, because these choices have an actual impact on the world around you. People comment on it having happened. Darius has to move out of the makeshift hospital because it is now inhabited by Skulls, and he's vocally bitter and resentful towards Reed when you find him again. I felt quite bad for having picked the wrong choice, honestly. It would have been incredibly cool if, after a district fell, the NPCs that you didn't directly kill would come to the hospital district, instead of just getting crossed off the list as dead. They could mope around the halls or sit against the outer walls of the building, casting suspicions on Reed, or just generally being upset about the state of their district. That would have added so much life to the world. No pun intended. Regardless of your choice, the Priwen guard bursts through the door to kill the patients in their beds, because that is clearly how you go about exterminating vampires. A lot of people definitely don't have bronchitis or the flu in this game. No, they must have all been vampires. Very justified murder right there. Reed moves himself back to the hospital to confront Lady Ashbury with the new developments, only to find her sucking a man dry of blood until he's dead. When you call her out on that behavior, she just gets snarky with you, even though really you have every conceivable right to be angry with her instead. Instead of simply explaining things right away, or at least saying that she can explain, she just tells you she's embarrassed you caught her raiding the fridge at night. The crazy thing is, Reed does seem to be okay with this. After first being upset for about 2 dialogue choices, he literally skips into, "Anyway, I have concluded my inquiries concerning your blackmailer." As if he didn't just see her bite a man to death, after specifically sending Jonathan out to stop a blackmailer who was, in fact, telling the truth. And now we're happy to take vampire history lessons instead of pursuing this particular line of questioning. And no, you don't get an option to have Reed say, "You know, I'm a little uncomfortable with you killing people. Please elaborate." You can ask her if Swansea allows her to kill, but that's the extent of it. And he's calmer in asking that than he is when asking the local waitress about their daily specials. She explains that she only feeds on those who are already dying. But again, game, Jonathan doesn't have to drink any blood throughout the entire playthrough if you simply choose not to. And he's doing quite alright. You get to ask ASHBURY some questions now, about vampires, of course. And let's go over some vampire names first, because like many vampire-based fiction, this game too just cannot help but give their vampires names other than just vampire. Real, proper vampires like Jonathan Reed are called Ekons. Ekons can make new vampires by having the victim drink the Ekon's blood, but the further down the line you go, the more the blood dilutes. So Jonathan is a very high up Ekon. He can make a new Ekon easily, but then that Ekon can maybe create another decent Ekon? But that Ekon will probably make a really shitty vampire. That really shitty vampire that barely even has any real vampire blood is called a Skull. Then there's also different races of vampire, like the Volcod, who are just really big vampires, but there are also Volcods that look like wolves, but use the stock bear roar sound effect when they attack, and there's speculation that beast Volcods are what Skulls are to Ekons, but the Priwen calls all of them leeches, and vampires as a whole prefer to refer to the entire family tree as immortals, but the really, really important vampires that are even better than Ekons are referred to as elders or ancients. Is this needlessly complicated? Yes, probably. The main, most important point I need you to focus on, however, is that to create another vampire, one must drink of the vampire's blood. Here's the thing. Jonathan didn't do that. We see in the opening scene that a vampire bites Jonathan, and then we see him wake up in a mass grave. Biting is apparently not part of the turning process whatsoever, so first of all, what was the point of that bite in the first place? Secondly, did he pull Jonathan's jaw open off-screen so he could pour some blood in? If yes, then that's pretty bloody poor storytelling on the game's part.
How did Jonathan then get the blood in his body? Did the guy just knock me out and then opened my mouth and poured in some blood and made it, oh, that'll swallow it, and then left? That seems a bit convoluted.
Once
Spiked his
glorious,
drink.
but still dangerous.
They had art for everything, but they couldn't add a single one where Jonathan drinks some immortal juice. Instead, we had one of a bite that didn't need to happen. This isn't the only time this becomes a problem, however. Oh no. Let's move on. So at this point, Lady ASHBURY basically confirms that I was created by an elder because only the powerful immortals can mentally call to their progeny. She also mentions that my creator has been pretty cruel to me so far, but those are honestly the main takeaways here. We leave to analyze the blood from Crane's lost patient and develop a new theory on how the vampiric condition is transmitted through the flu, which isn't entirely true and isn't entirely wrong, but he goes to talk to Swansea about it anyway. He's very excited about vampire blood in general, but he also has the unfortunate task of telling Dr. Reed that his sister, you know, the one he killed at the start of the game, is about to be buried. So we attend the funeral without being seen and have a bit of a breakdown until ASHBURY shows up again to share some kind words that amount to, I think you should just go to church, honestly. And off we go to confess our sins at church, only to be interrupted by a Volcod called Fergal Banksha, telling us to stop drawing so much attention because the Ascalon Club doesn't like it. The Ascalon Club is a powerful group of vampires who like to tell everyone else what to do. And I think he was serious because not a moment later my game crashed in a fatal error. We finally make it to church and confess that we're very upset about our dead sister. Apparently that was all we wanted, so off we go back to the hospital, but again we're interrupted. This time by the voice in our head, who of course is also our maker. He actually appears before us this time, and we confirm that he is, in fact, my maker. So now Jonathan has doubly confirmed the origins of his vampirism, keep that in mind. Our maker likes riddles, and he literally will not speak a single straight sentence to us in one go. He seems to imply that Jonathan was made a vampire because he needed him to fight the current epidemic, however, and tells him that he should seek the truth. Reed is supremely confused by the whole thing and goes to meet his surrogate father, Swansea, again. Swansea already has a guest, however, the leader of the Priwen Guard, who isn't happy to see us. He was here because the hospital was attacked in our absence. There are injured patients, which makes them double patients, I guess, one dead and several missing. Let's backtrack here to the non-spoiler part of this review. When Jonathan Reed first entered the hospital on my hard mode playthrough, I killed everyone I could possibly get my hands on at that point in time. Far more than just a single person died that night, but no one cared even a single bit. Now, a single person died, and there's a few missing, and everyone's up in arms about it. I wasn't exactly stealthy about it either. Sure, the game made me mesmerize my targets behind a bookshelf, but I still left their bodies on the floor for anyone to find. Not to mention that regardless of how careful I would be, I wasn't, about hiding the bodies, that would still mean people had started to disappear. So which is it, game? Do you care about the hospital patients and staff dying out, or don't you? Swansea is actually more concerned about the public image of the hospital, and if this news broke, it could ruin them. How? There's an active plague sweeping over the city, and you're the only open hospital as far as I can tell. What are they gonna do? Get a doctor's degree themselves before they keel over dead? There's tents outside of the actual hospital because we don't have enough beds inside to keep everyone comfortable. Even though, you know, most of the inside beds are empty for some reason, but that's a whole other can of worms. If you need extra beds outside of your walls, I don't think you're wanting for patients as it is. You're also running low on medical supplies, and your main benefactor is a vampire lady who doesn't give a shit about your reputation. So what is the actual problem? More blood for the blood gods, I say, or in this case, ASHBURY, who might as well be your blood god given that she funds the whole place. The dead lady is Harriet Jones. She isn't actually dead, but they don't know this yet. Instead, Dr. Edgar Swansea thinks Sean Hampton was the culprit because he's also missing. And now the guard thinks the hospital is a breeding ground for vampires. So Jonathan skips off to the docks to find Sean and figure out what's going on, but we're having a hard time finding him, and all the while we're finding more mutilated bodies. When we do eventually find him, it turns out that he is in fact a skull. Except he still seems to be in complete control of his actions. He also now suddenly knows that I'm a vampire, even though he's never had a clue before. I guess vampires can smell other vampires? He explains that he sees this event as a blessing because he can now walk amongst plague victims without problems. He also doesn't need to drink blood. He only needs to eat flesh, and it doesn't have to be living flesh either. Sean denies having killed Harriet Jones too, so to prove it, he gives you a key to the sewers, where he says we'll find all the proof we need. And if after our trip there we still believe him a threat, we can come back and pass judgment as we like. Once in the sewers, we find Fergal again, and he's crushing innocent skulls, with his unrendered graphics, presumably. We defeat him and move on to find old Regis, a skull who fosters a community of skulls that are all lucid, just trying to live their best lives in the sewers. Bridget explains the Ascalon Club to you, and as it turns out, they're mostly about gathering money and oppressing skulls. We also ask her how some skulls like her and Sean don't go crazy, but her answer is because the plot demands it, so that doesn't really get us anywhere. Harriet also lives in the sewers now as a very, very one-side bloated skull. The conversation we have with her is weird, to say the least. She says people try to feed her, but she's just not hungry. But then immediately tells us that she'll be good as long as the people here feed her, and she will not shut up about how wronged she's been and how much no one cares about her. Another strange note to make is that it seems like Sean Hampton has always known about the Sewer Skull Network, because when Harriet pulled him out of the hospital with her, he was the one who brought her here as well. Bridget also tells us that the sad saint, meaning Sean, had always been kind to them. So why didn't Sean recognize us as a vampire before in the hospital? Was he just trying to keep a secret? And if he already knew about all this, why didn't he bring William to the sewers right away? Conclusion, Sean's a weirdo. We learned that a shadow apparently killed all the freshly murdered people and that said shadow hates Dr. Reed. Upon returning, we find Sean eating some
fresh meat,
waiting for us to return and judge him. Somehow our first question isn't whose flesh is that, but we proceed to make another pillar choice not long after sitting down with him. Sean seems very okay with the life of a skull, so you can choose to spare him. However, Sean is actually extremely wrong about the safety of his condition. Soon after leaving, Sean will infect the rest of the shelter he works in with his vampirism, and he himself will lose his mind and turn into a violent skull instead. What's weird about this choice is that Sean should have realized what was happening rather quickly, and he'd have had ample opportunity to go live in the sewers instead, or at least ask Bridget for help. But no, he just goes crazy. If you embrace him to death, the district will be very upset, but at least no one seems to immediately die. The option I picked was turn, which causes Reed to order Sean to drink his blood. And this largely heals Sean. He continues doing his thing, and he doesn't need to eat
fresh meat
anymore, which is nice. Right after walking outside, another corpse gets dumped on the street, but this one is carrying our mother's brooch, so of course this requires some more investigating. In the man's house, we find a trail of blood. When we follow the trail all the way to the graveyard whilst jumping through some hoops, we finally find the church's vicar sitting in the middle of said graveyard. Turns out, our sister is now a vampire. We turned her and she's very angry. So angry, she has kidnapped our dear mother and threatens to kill her too, as she did with all the victims across town. Okay, that's a lot to unpack. So, first of all, she claims I turned her and brings up a kiss. Let's just rewind back to the beginning where we killed our sister. Stop, right there. That was our kiss. Here's the problem with this entire bloody scene. Pun very much intended. The blood on Jonathan's mouth at that point was not Jonathan's. It was Mary's. You know, the person whose blood we just sucked. And even then, that blood would not have been drank by Mary. We gave her the tiniest peck on the lips. Later on in this story, we also turn someone into a vampire, but we literally barf half a pint of our blood into his mouth and make very sure he swallows the whole damn thing. Mary did not drink our blood. I'm sorry, but she didn't. Even if you say that she somehow ingested the tiniest bit of our blood, somehow, that would not make her a vampire this powerful, because the game has already established that the amount of actual vampire blood in your system matters. Not to mention that the further down the vampire lineage line you go, the weaker the vampires get. You know, the whole skull explanation. So it would follow that we, Jonathan, as the supposed creators of her, Mary, would be vastly more powerful than Mary to begin with. Dr. Reed took quite some time to build up his power level in the first place, and we even had some form of guidance and a safe haven to rest and build our strength. We witnessed Mary's funeral not too long ago, meaning that apparently she hadn't turned yet by then, and she mentions having to claw her way out of her grave afterwards, so how in the flying vampire fucks did she get this powerful this fast on mediocre blood and 0% guidance? This game refuses to follow its own damn rules, and as a total aside, she's also missing her damn leg graphics. Okay, moving on. We kick her back into the grave after she kills the vicar mid-fight and vow to find a cure for this vampiric plague. After a good night's sleep, we're invited to Lady Ashbury's mansion to discuss the increased activity from the Guard of Priwen, and a secondary invite for Jonathan extended to him by the Ascalon Club. When we enter her house, we tell Lady Ashbury that whoever our maker is, he must be a powerful vampire. I'm not sure why we're being vague about it, because, well, we've now met the guy already, but alright. Ashbury then asks us how we got to that conclusion, when she was the one who actually, quite literally, told me this near the very start of the game. When she told me not to speak of the voices to anyone for fear of being hunted for his powerful blood. But the game's forgetfulness does not end there. Oh no. Jonathan then has the option to ask Ashbury if it was her who made her. You know, the same question he asked her at the beginning of the game, and she wholeheartedly denied it, and now she does it again, shockingly. Oh, and also we're in a relationship now, because boy do we have chemistry, I guess. Due to the lack of facial expressions in the game, it's pretty difficult to tell if someone is actually showing you any emotion at all, but she puts Jonathan's hand on her heart and tells him to look at her, and now they're in love, because he literally touched her heart, I guess. Pun absolutely intended. We're off to the Ascalon Club to meet Lord Redgrave, who is apparently also the offspring of a very powerful vampire called William Marshall. He's lying about that, by the way. Without asking too many questions, Reed decides to join the club through an extremely 10-year-old boys making their boys-only club-esque ritual, after which the whole room starts chanting, "One of us, only barely swallowing gooble gobble at the end of the sentence. This particular club meeting is also attended by Aloysius Dawson. Not an immortal, but one of the many I'm very obviously a scumbag characters in this game. He's also the pillar of the current district, West End. Reed asks him if he joined the club to become an immortal himself, which he fiercely denies, even though he cannot stop complaining about his impending death. He's also very, very rich and wants to build a wall to keep the poor out. Yes, he's that type of guy. Also, yes, Dr. Reed asks Redgrave twice whether he knows I killed Fergal, and then we ask him twice whether that will be a problem because this game just bloody loves to repeat itself, so why the hell shouldn't I do the same in its review? And when we go outside, I kid you not, and boy, I really, really wish I was kidding you, when we go outside, Reed has the audacity to mutter, "I think Lord Redgrave just suggested I was sired by an ancient vampire. In case you were keeping count, that's the third time someone's told the good doctor that he was sired by an ancient vampire, and equally the third time we're somehow surprised by this information." Our investigation now leads us to the streets of West End, where we find out that there's a particular house that's been highly suspicious for a while now. When we go to investigate two separate houses, we find skulls in each of them, all infected by a woman named Doris Fletcher, who we can find at her acting school. At said school, we find out that Miss Fletcher has been spitefully infecting everyone in the theater and planned to infect as many other people as she could. She, however, wasn't the first infected either. No, that was her mother, Harriet Jones. Yes, the one from the hospital, the one that now sat in the sewers with the friendly skulls. We defeat Doris and she sets herself on fire just in time to miss the Priwen guard barging in once more, so Reed has to run for his unlife again. Back to the Ascalon Club to tell them what happened. Lady Elizabeth Ashbury is also there because she is, and Lord Redgrave really just pats us on the head and then asks us to turn Aloysius Dawson into a vampire. You know, the guy who told us explicitly that he wasn't there to become an immortal. Apparently he cannot wait to become our progeny. In any other game, I'd give them the benefit of the doubt and say he lied to me or there were schemes afoot. But given that Jonathan forgot he was an elder vampire spawned 3 consecutive times, I'm inclined to say the game just forgot about this one as well. Not to mention that Ashbury tells us outright that Mr. Dawson had spent his entire life searching for a way to cheat death, and they didn't think it was worth bringing up to the man who was about to make him his progeny that he'd been lied to? Calling this one another oversight. Ashbury also finally informs us that Redgrave has been lying about his lineage, and his blood quality is so trash he's only capable of creating skulls. So we, the very powerful Ekon, pay Mr. Dawson a visit on his deathbed, and we have yet another pillar decision to make. Throughout the conversation, he's a prick to Jonathan, so honestly, my first instinct was to kill him outright, so I did exactly that. If you kill him, you get kicked out of the Ascalon Club. Big deal. They were annoying anyway. If you turn him into a vampire, he becomes the actual devil himself and does everything he promised he'd do. That means his own district will stay healthy, but everyone else certainly won't. And I guess you get to stay in the snobby club. If you know enough about him, you can also charm him, which makes him turn his life around, give all his money to the poor, healing the entire town, and then he dies. Oh, and you get kicked out of the club, of course. I'm okay with my killing option. Lord Redgrave is very upset with you. Very upset indeed. You can tell by his static expression. Outside, you find old Bridget again, who dumps some exposition on you. She doesn't tell you this bit yet, but I will tell you now. Old Bridget is a progeny of Lord Redgrave. She was his wife, and he made her this skull while trying to preserve her beauty. That's how she knew to tell Lady Ashbury that his blood was trash-level quality. Apparently, the hunters are making ready to attack the hospital though, so we rush back home, whilst killing all the very weak Ascalon members on the way there. If you go off to find Lady Ashbury before reaching the hospital, by the way, you tell her that the hospital was already attacked and they were probably after Dr. Swansea. So I guess Jonathan Reed, the vampire lord, now also has future vision. At the hospital itself, everyone is doing their usual thing, not giving a damn about anything, even though, yes, Dr. Edgar Swansea was brutally dragged from his office by a group of Priwen guards. Reed, being the only person with eyes in the hospital, follows the trail of blood Swansea left only to find Mr. Geoffrey McCullum, who thinks we caused the plague. But before he can torture a confession out of us, his torture device malfunctions, so we just have a boss battle about it. When we defeat him, we can choose to either let him go or to turn him into a vampire as well. Coincidentally, there is more romantic tension in this one scene than there is throughout the entire game between Reed and Ashbury. If you spare him, you will find him killing skulls at a graveyard later. You ask him for an item you need, and he gives it to you, while informing you that they called off the Great Hunt, but they still do small hunts. If you turn him, you will find him killing skulls at a graveyard later. You ask him for an item you need, and he gives it to you, while informing you that he feels smashing. Personally, I spared him, but the turning scene is pretty cool, so there's that to consider. Reed decides to go to Doris's theater again to find Swansea. How does he know he's at the theater? Nobody knows, because nobody ever told us. We just sort of assume he's there because that's where we saw them last time, and Geoffrey says they found proof there. Just so you know, game, that does not automatically mean that this is where Swansea is being held. Reed will not stop telling us about his ancient vampire lineage facts, but the game couldn't spare a single line for Reed saying, McCullum mentioned the theater. Could they be holding Swansea there? As it stands, Reed's just tapping into his clairvoyant abilities again without telling us, and it's not okay. When Reed reaches the theater, he even mentions that the Priwen Guard made this place their new headquarters after they invaded, which very much sounded like a surprise to him too. Within the theater, we find out that this game doesn't have any rules concerning their infection rate, but I guess at this point that's almost expected. We find Swansea tied to the ceiling, severely beaten. He tells us he was tortured for information and false confessions. He's very much on the brink of death, but thankfully he still has the time to dump a wild amount of exposition on us about William Marshall. Likewise, we dump a bunch of exposition on him too, about Harriet Jones and Doris Fletcher, whose name is actually Doris Jones. After our wild flailing, the good Dr. Swansea admits to having experimented with vampire blood in an effort to cure Harriet Jones. He used Lady Ashbury's blood, no less, which means that the source of the infection is, yes, Lady Ashbury. Now we get to make a final pillar choice for Dr. Swansea. You can let him die, which means he, dies. You can help him die faster, which means that he, dies. Or you can save him by turning him into a vampire, which means he lives on, happily experimenting in his hospital, sniffing necks and occasionally fantasizing about taking over as leader of the Brotherhood of St. Paul's Stool. You know, the usual. After Edgar sucks most of our blood supply straight out of our veins, we go back to tell Lady Ashbury that, hey, your blood is the source of the plague. She gets pretty upset about it and tells us to leave her alone, and she poofs straight out of the window. So if you're wondering, this is what our relationship looks like so far.
Jonathan, I, as a high society vampire who has seen much of the world, now declare us to be in a relationship. For plot reasons.
We basically just met and have barely talked, but I also love you.
Jonathan, I'm breaking up with you. For plot reasons.
Yeah, that's fair.
With Ashbury gone, Jonathan goes off to create a plague antidote of the kind William Marshall had once made. One of the ingredients is the blood of William Marshall himself, which we can only get at the Ascalon Club. Now, you might be wondering how on earth we're going to get him to give us any of his very, very special blood. After all, we were kicked out of the club not too long ago, and everyone's been trying to kill us ever since. I guess we'll have to fight him for it. We'll have to destroy the club and abscond with the blood post-haste. I'll show you the actual timeline of the club to save you time.
Join our cult. I will join your cult. Fulfill this horrible request. No. No, we hate you now. That's all right with me. I will now proceed to kill all of your members. Never show your face again.
2 hours later.
Hello, I am back because I require a very valuable relic that you possess. But we hate you. That's okay. It's important to me. Fair point. Here you go. Thanks. Bye.
I super wish I was exaggerating right now, but I'm really not. We take the blood so graciously given to us and hop-skip to the graveyard where we find McCullum, who we ask for even more blood. This time we need the blood of King Arthur, which the Priwen guards hold. We're friends now, I guess, so he gives us the blood without issue too. Our final ingredient is some insulin from the old morgue we'd gone to near the start of the game. Yeah, that one isn't very fanciful, I'll admit. With the antidote crafted, we leave for the sewers to find Harriet Jones, but she's gone, and the sewer skull hideout has been trashed. The skulls slaughtered. By following the blood, we eventually get to the lower level where we are confronted by our maker once again. He tells us his name is Myrddin Wild, and that he isn't made of blood. No, he is blood. He made us a vampire because we could offer a modern answer to the ancient threat, which I suppose means an antidote. What is this ancient threat, you ask? Apparently there's a Red Queen who wakes up from nap time every so often, and she's super not a morning person, so she spends her time screwing with everybody's lives. Myrddin also calls her the Morrigan, the Celtic goddess of war, but that's not her only name. What I'm trying to say is that Myrddin over here is just a giant exposition sponge who likes to talk in riddles, because I guess the game thinks that makes everyone sound smart. It's mostly a little annoying. Don't worry, he'll be back. As it is, we find Harriet just a little bit ahead, looking properly disgusting, so we set about killing her. She isn't the final boss, however. No, the Red Queen's avatar is. By the way, Harriet is 3 levels higher than the Red Queen's avatar. I'm not sure why. When she dies, it becomes clear, sort of, that she just likes to make people suffer for fun. Myrddin talks her back to sleep, and old Bridget shows up again to tell us that she showed up and to throw optional exposition your way. We still don't know what happened to ASHBURY though, so we travel our butts to her Scotland mansion, and run into bloody Myrddin again. He's here to dump yet more exposition on you, but what I really mean is, he's trying to open up possible DLC options.
So how did Harriet become the first carrier? You're the doctor, you tell me. Did the queen do it, or did the sickness make the queen wake up? Who knows? What about the Brotherhood? That sounds like possible DLC material. What about the Guard of Priwen? They might hunt you in a DLC. What about Ascalon? Oh, I don't know, but I wonder how they got their hands on Marshall's blood. DLC material, methinks. You mentioned I'm not your only son, so who else is a son? Shakespeare, Isaac Newton, Alfred the Great, Francis Drake, Thomas More, Guy Fawkes. I have no reason to believe that any of these people are actually also your sons. I'm just throwing out random names, but are they? Yes, somehow one of the people you mentioned on that list is indeed a vampire. Find out who in a DLC. King Arthur? Yep, the son. Don't ask me how he survived in the sun, I can't answer that. I thought you knew and saw everything. Bittersweet wrath, my far-removed child. What? McQueen!
And here's the strange thing. Remember how the game told us that drinking a vampire's blood will turn them into a vampire too? Well, it turns out that King Arthur was a vampire too. And since McCullum drank a serum created with his blood, he drank his blood, so why isn't he a vampire? Or are we going to let that one slide, but Mary totally drank Reed's blood and became a vampire? Ashbury's castle, by the way, is just a collection of, look at all of these famous artists and the like that Lady Ashbury knew, isn't it cool? In the cellar we find a book, nay, an ancient tome. The tome was written by William Marshall and describes his entire journey through vampirehood. Myrddin came to him pretending to be the Archangel Michael and turned him into a vampire. He visits him again later and tells him to cure the plague, a bit like what he did to Jonathan this time around. And yes, they're implying that the Black Death was just this Red Queen nonsense again. So the guy keeps fighting the good fight until he eventually finds Elizabeth Ashbury, except she's still called Elizabeth Englewood here. He turns her into a vampire, and when she's done learning vampire things from him, she changes her name to Elizabeth Blackwood and saunters off into the wide world. He too changed his name to William Thorne and starts running an inn. But oh no, the plague returns. So he's off to fight more good fights. Unfortunately, during his fighting times, he gets infected by the plague and has to burn down most of London to get rid of the plague carrier this time. Yes, they are in fact attributing the Great Fire of London in 1666 to vampire shenanigans. But it's too late for William because he's been tainted by the Red Queen's rage and he's just very angry all the time now. He locks himself away until Elizabeth comes back for him, and in his blind rage he bit her and infected her too. He finally controlled his bloodlust, but now she goes around slaughtering people all the same. She even made a new progeny to do the slaughtering with her. Eventually, he asks for the help of the Brotherhood of the St. Paul's Stool, and they propose the use of the Tear of Angels, an artifact that could heal anything. He manages to create the artifact and chained himself down to wait for Elizabeth. She was now the mistress of the dark who liked to murder at will in France. But she came over anyway, and he gave her the Tear of Angels so she could be free of the hate. He only asked that she take care of him. Later she returned to him again, now cured. She bought a castle in Scotland, the one we're standing in right now, reading this book, and they'd be moving in there together. That's the full story. It is extremely obvious from this story that the Lady Elizabeth here is our Lady Ashbury, especially as she told us her old name before. But Jonathan, after having read this book, doesn't have a single voice line to offer. We close the book and he just stands there. No, "Oh, Elizabeth, why didn't you tell me?" Or, "So she's the daughter of William Marshall? Incredible." No, nothing at all, but it gets worse. We walk on and find Lady Ashbury and her father, William, and Jonathan is surprised to learn that she calls him father, after he had just read a book confirming this very thing. Not to mention that Jonathan brings up a very valid point. Why didn't they just try to cure William as well as they did her? She says she tried, but clearly she didn't try very hard because she didn't use any of the ingredients I used, and she, as a progeny of William Marshall, would be powerful enough to just grab whatever it was she needed anyway. But no. We're going to kill him for emotional impact, I guess, even though we've only just met the guy, so the player doesn't really give a damn, and I guess neither does Elizabeth, given her lack of attempts. And even without her, why didn't William just make 2 doses? I hardly think they would have stopped him. I got so annoyed after hearing Elizabeth just tell me all the things I just read in the book that when "How did you meet William Marshall?" and "Who are you really?" popped up as dialogue options, I said fuck it and just skipped ahead. We already have the answers to these questions, and so does Jonathan. The game just doesn't want to accept that. And hey, if you put these options here to make sure players who didn't read the book would still get the information, then for the love of all that is holy, just don't have the book sit there right in front of the entrance. It's just a slap in the face at that point. Here's a whole book of all the information you need. Your dialogue options with Elizabeth are now null and void, but Jonathan will accept none of that and be surprised by everything. Anyway, Elizabeth chooses this moment to kill William, and she also wants to throw herself into the flames, but depending on your choices, that can go a few ways. The best possible ending, achieved by killing absolutely no regular, non-pillar NPCs, has the pair set off to travel the world in search for a cure. The second best ending, the one I achieved by only killing 1 or 2 regular NPCs, sees them stand in the castle with old Bridget taking care of them, as Jonathan tries to find a cure. The bad endings have Elizabeth die. If you killed a lot of people, then Jonathan just gets very upset and sits there sipping blood all melancholy-like. If you killed every single damn person, collapsing all the districts in the process, then Jonathan also starts murdering a bunch, and he honestly doesn't seem to care too much when Elizabeth dies. And that is the end of the game. By now you've probably figured out that the game tries to link practically every single important person and every single important happening in history to vampires, somehow. Vampires destroyed everything, and also saved everything. Is that a cop-out? Yes, I believe so. The story was convoluted at best, and when it comes to the normal NPCs, uninteresting at worst. The combat was stale and repetitive, and everyone's faces looked like stone, but the worst part is they got so close. I was truly invested each time we were asked to make a pillar choice. Is this person worth saving? I've gotten to know them. Sean has good intentions, but I don't think he sees the danger in his method. Dorothy believes she only has one way to help, but it's hurting others. Edgar is on a quest to help the entire world, but makes some very unethical decisions on the way there. Aloysius Dawson can go and absolutely fuck himself. And you can see some of their more detailed approach shine through constantly. I mentioned the music and overall tone of the city already, but you might have noticed too that they took the time to make each note you pick up look specifically like that note. The scribbles on the paper actually spell out the title of the note. That's amazing attention to detail. If only they'd taken the time to cut some NPCs and instead focused on giving each and every one of them an intriguing questline with a satisfying end. If only they'd had proper facial animations, even just a few furrows of the eyebrows or narrowing eyes would have been just fine. If only they'd stopped to realize that Jonathan was repeating things he'd already heard over and over and over again. If only they hadn't tried to write 1,000 plot threads at the same time while concluding only a few. All of them were nearly there. They were nearly good, but they didn't go the distance, and it shows. This game could have been one of the greatest, and you know what? To some people it is. I'm sure that's what the comment section to this video will be all about, how wrong I am and how stupid I am and how I just don't get it, and that I definitely don't have a good sense of humor because my skits were super cringe. But I say to you, Vampyr fans, keep enjoying this game. I'm very glad that you did, but I for one most decidedly did not. And I hope that if Don't Not ever decides to make a part 2, that they'll take the time to polish it. Have a wonderful rest of your day.